Hey, welcome back everyone for part 2 of our counterpoint episode that we started last night, where we made some connections, some good, some bad, and then threw them in the salt tank for a week. It is now the first week in November. I'm back from Vegas, and all of our wires are right here. They've been sitting in the salt tank for a week, and let me tell you guys, some of these look better than others, and we kind of expected that, right? You know, closed up or unsecured or you know, bare copper in the elements is an issue. So that's what we're going to demonstrate here. Now I got a couple different tests set up here, guys. We're going to load test with the bulbs. We have a meter here that's hooked up to an amp clamp. We're going to measure the overall amperage of the circuit. Each of these bulbs pulls roughly 1 amp and 0.95 or so amps. So in total, 10 bulbs, we're going to see 10 amps as soon as I turn these on. We'll run an ohm test across each of these wires, and then we are going to hook them up into our circuits here and see, load testing wise, if our bulbs are dimmer or brighter depending on the circuit. So let's start with the, let's call this one of our control wires. This was one that was just bare copper, nothing soldered onto it, nothing cut in the middle, just bare copper. And as you guys can see, we got the old green fuzzies on there. Now, one thing to note is that this wire feels kind of crunchy inside. So I think our salt water is actually wicked down into our wire, and it's kind of crunchy inside of here as we move this around, more so than our properly connected wires. They don't feel crunchy inside when they were sealed up. So let's go ahead and we'll put this over here for you guys. Should be able to see that. Let's run an ohm test on this thing. Make sure that we're on ohms. Beautiful. And there we go. And actually, I'm going to have to hold this back here. So you can see we're at 0.2 ohms. So even though we have corrosion on here, we still have a decent connection for an ohm test. But remember, we don't want to be trusting an ohm test. We want to be load testing our circuits. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start trimming down these ends and putting our connectors on each one. Each one is going to have the exact same connectors on each. They're going to have the exact same amount trimmed off of each end. And then we will go ahead and hook up the meter, ohm test them, and then we'll load test them. All right, so this is our soldered connection that was taped. And you can see in the end of this wire, it's not shiny copper anymore. So we had some salt water wicking into it. This side is shinier, so I wonder if the salt water went this direction and corroded our wire a little bit. All right, so our soldered connection with tape over it is going to ring in at 0.2 of an ohm. So that looks pretty good. We got a pretty good connection there with our ohm meter. We'll see how that works with our load test in just a second. All right, I'm going to run through the rest of these guys, and I'll point out anything along the way that is interesting. All right, here's our non-heat shrinkable butt connector. You can see we have corrosion forming. Not really anything inside of there. Hard to see in there, but we definitely have some corrosion forming on there. And again, we have our wires not very shiny. You can actually see a little bit of green right there. All right, so our non-heat shrinkable butt connector comes in with an ohm reading of 0.2 also. So far, all of our connections are passing an ohm test, but we'll see what happens once we actually get to a load test. All right, so here we have our wires that were twisted together and taped. See how these come out. Again, looks like we have corrosion down at the base of our wires. There's some green in there. All right, so those are crimped on. Hoping to see a little bit higher resistance on this one. Look at that. So definitely higher resistance across our twisted pair of wires that were taped. I wonder how this is going to come across with our load test. All right, 3 down, a couple more to go. Here's our wire nut. One thing visually you can see already, pretty nasty looking inside of there. Definitely salt water got to the ends of our wire. It's nasty looking. All right, let's see what our wire nut comes in at. Well, I didn't expect that. I expected a higher resistance in there, especially for how corroded that wiring is. All right, we'll see how it does on the load test. All right, here's our control wire. This one had no connection across the middle, and it was sealed on either end. So this is going to be our control. This is the one that's going to give us our, hopefully, fully bright bulb. And this should pass an ohm test, no problem. There's no connection in the center, and it was fully sealed, so we should be right there down around the 0.1 or 0.2 ohms of resistance across this. Beautiful, 0.2. All right, now we have our properly done. These things are pretty close together here. Yep, this one's going to be the properly done heat shrinkable butt connector, nice and sealed. You can see where it got hot a little bit there when I was shrinking down the tubing, but it never ruined our insulation. Nice and flexible still outside of our joints, so there's no crunchy inside of this wire or anything like that. So this is looking really good. We'll see how it does in the load test, but I have a feeling it's going to pass our ohm test no problem. All right, so same, about that 0.2 mark. Beautiful. All right, let's go with our exposed connector. Now this was a crimp style connector that could be crimped or soldered. This one was soldered and not crimped, and then it was left exposed. And you can see we got tons of corrosion across there. A lot of surface corrosion across here. Let's see what it looks like. All right, so nice and secure. Oh. Let's see what we got. Huh, I didn't expect it to be that good. 0.2 again. So it's telling us that we have a good path for our wire. This is our, this was a crimp style, I believe, connector. Yep, crimp style connector that was crimped and not soldered, and then it has heat shrink tubing over the top. Nice and secure. I don't see any corrosion. I don't feel any crunchy feeling in the wire. And the end looks pretty good there. Looks pretty good there. See, nice and shiny looking copper there. No green in there at all. That's good. So it doesn't look like we had any penetration of the salt water on this one. So I would think this one's going to come across perfect on our ohm test. Perfect. So far the only one that's given us any trouble is that twisted pair of wires, which is, like I said, probably the worst possible connection you can use. All right, here's a soldered connection that was heat shrunk. Nice and solid connection, no crunchy in the wire, so I don't think we had any wicking of water inside of there. Looks good there. Let's get these crimped on. All right, let's see how our solder connection did. I would assume that this one's going to be just fine. I wouldn't think we got any issues. Beautiful, 0.2, looks great. And now our last connection was our improperly done heat shrinkable butt connector, where the plastic here was actually broken. Really, this looks pretty good. A little bit of crunchy feeling in here, but not horrible, not as bad as the other really, really bad connections. It's not horrible so far. I wouldn't say that this is the worst connection. Obviously not done properly, but I wouldn't call it the worst connection. Oh, also guys, I got the thermal camera hooked up, so we'll be able to look at these connections while they're under load to see if we have any heat across the connections. All right, so our last one here. Oh, a little bit on this one, a little bit higher, 0.3, 0.4, so not significant. So out of all of our leads here, the only one that's really failing the ohm test is going to be our twisted pair of wires with tape on it. That was the only one that was significantly higher. So now we have all of our wires connected up. Let's start off by just showing the control on this guy. We'll turn our amp clamp on and zero this. Our meter is still on, and there we go. We got 10 equally bright bulbs, and if we move our decimal point over where it belongs, we're sitting at 10.22 amps. All right, we got to do the conversion because this is reading voltage from our clamp, 10.22 amps, with each bulb reading roughly 1 amp. So I'm going to go through, I'm going to disconnect all 10 of these, and we're going to start hooking each one in. There we go, roughly 1 amp per bulb. And now I have our power lead here ready to connect up our lead. So I'm going to start on your right side, my left, with our control wire. So again, this was the wire that has no connection in the center, just ends crimped on either end. It did go through the salt tank. So we're going to hook this in, and there we go. So I would say that looks to be about equally as bright as it did before, and right around a 1 amp draw on that. So now I think what I want to do is I want to go bad connection to good connection. So we're going to start here with our known good, and we're going to start with what we assume to be the worst connection and work our way to the best. So we'll start with the twisted pair of wires that failed our ohm test. This guy right here, let's see what we've got. Wasn't that interesting? So we passed our ohm test. Our bulb looks equally as bright, and we're pulling roughly 1 amp through that. We'll see how that does on thermal. Let's go next to our wire nut. This thing was showing corrosion inside of the nut. Again, looks to be equally as bright. Well, this is interesting. I expected this one and this one to be definitely dimmer than the rest. Again, roughly 1 amp. Let's go with the exposed soldered connection. There we go. We'll go with the non-heat shrink butt connector. I wonder what temperature is like across these different connections. We'll have to look with the thermal once we're all connected up here. All right, then let's go with the improperly done butt connector. So far we're still all, get this out of the way. Still looking really, really good here, all things considered. I expected a difference across our load here. We'll go with the taped up connection. This was a taped up solder connection. And then we'll go with the crimped and heat shrunk butt connector. The heat shrinkable butt connector, properly done. And then last but not least, a heat shrunk solder connection. This would be my favorite connection. This is going to be what I would think to be the best possible connection. So now we should be back up around that 10 amp mark, 10.14, a little bit lower, but nothing significant. And as we look across, from my end here, guys, it looks like all of our bulbs are still lit up the same. I'm actually a little bit shocked at the results of this. I did not expect this. I expected to see our poor connections down on this side. I expected them to show a voltage drop and then show that in our bulb. I expected to see that across our load. I'm surprised here. Let's take a look at our thermal imager and see what we've got. So I'm going to lock this thing into the table, which is, we'll call it 84 degrees, 85 degrees. I'm going to lock it in. And let's see what we have across our connections. So you guys can see with my hand in there, our connection right here looks nice and cool. Go to our other connections, still nice and cool. Oh, did you see that? Get my hand out of the way. With my finger there, you guys can see, here's our wire nut. Looks pretty good, but look next to it. See our corroded wire? See our, this is our twisted together pair of wires. You can see that we're creating heat inside of that connection. So as this thing were to be on, we're getting resistance in there. We are definitely creating heat across that connection. I'm actually shocked that we're not seeing that same thing across our wire nut, even though we definitely showed the wire nut has corrosion inside of it, but maybe at this point it has not failed yet. But our twisted pair of wires has definitely failed after a week in the salt tank. This is not a good connection. This will cause issues. As we look at our loads, you can definitely tell that they all look to be, I would say, about the same, temperature-wise and brightness-wise. But definitely a big difference across our connection for the twisted pair. The rest of them, as you guys can see, look to be pretty good until we get to this end of the table, until we get to here. All right. Well, I guess I'm a little bit surprised by these results. I mean, this was an experiment. The goal of this was to go out there and see which connections were going to be the best and which ones were going to give us issues. I think we kind of all assumed that our twisted pair of wires that were just taped together would give us issues. In fact, it's actually warm to the touch. We assumed that that was going to give us issues. We also, most of us probably assumed the wire nut would give us issues, and I'm with you. I don't think that you should be using twisted pair of wires, a wire nut, some sort of connection that's not covered, a non-heat shrinkable butt connector. These four have no place on a vehicle, okay? These four connections have no place on a car because they're not protected. They will eventually cause issues, all right? So after a week in our salt tank, the only one that's causing issues so far is our twisted pair. These three seem okay right now, but they're not going to last. Also, our improperly done butt connector is not going to last. I would assume that our tape at some point is going to give way and not last, leaving us with three good connections. A crimpable connector that's got heat shrink over it, a heat shrink butt connector, as well as a soldered connection that is heat shrunk over it, okay? I would be using these three connections on the car. These are going to be our best three connections. Now, the results, again, were not what I had hoped, but I think this was a good experiment. We were able to show the amperage on everything. And you know what, guys? I think I want to do this again. I think what I'm going to do, it is now November. We don't have any snow on the ground yet or any salt on the ground yet in the good old state of Wisconsin, but it's coming. Winter is coming. So what I want to do is I'm going to take each of these connections and I'm going to find a way to secure up our ends. I might just trim the ends and re-dip them in the liquid electrical tape, and then we're going to do this again. I want to do this again come spring, so give it a 3 or 4 months or so. I want to leave these sit through a Wisconsin winter. I think I'm going to zip tie them to the frame underneath my truck, and we'll see what happens. Who knows? we might come back and have the same results, or we could have very different results. Don't know. I think that's going to be the way that we complete this experiment at this point, because really these results are mostly inconclusive, not what I was expecting to find. So you know what? I think we're going to leave it at that, guys. If you liked what you saw, make sure to follow us. Make sure to subscribe. Check us out on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Follow us out there for recent updates of what's going on in the shop or what's going on in the industry. And then make sure to join us for our next videos that are coming out. And then in the spring, we're going to do this again. We're going to do a part 3 with this, of this exact same setup with each of these sitting under the vehicle for a good 3 months or so in a Wisconsin winter. So we'll see what fails then. Until then, guys, that's going to be it for today. So thanks for watching, and everybody have a great week. Happy wrenching, everyone. Thank you. You guys thought it was over. Well, as I was sitting there editing and putting the video together, you know, I was thinking, all of our bulbs are showing the same amount. And the question is, are we going to see a slight variance? Because right now we're seeing slight variances in our ohming of the wires, but very, very slim. But what about a voltage drop test? It's something that I was thinking we should probably do on here, because we might be able to see some slight variances before our wiring gets even worse, because, you know, overall here they're pretty much the same. So let's do a voltage drop test and see what this looks like. So for voltage drop, guys, we're going to go power to power across our connection here, and we're going to see if we're dropping voltage or not. One thing about voltage drop testing is you want to have the circuit on. You want to have the load turned on, because that's going to be drawing current across our circuit. So there's our meter. What we're looking for here is some sort of number that tells us how much voltage we're dropping across each connection. So we're going to start off with our known good and a perfectly connected wire, supposedly with no connection in the middle. We're dropping 31 millivolts. Okay, not too bad. Seems a little higher than I expected. And we could be dropping that across these connectors that are on here as well. If we start on just the power side lead, we're dropping 24. So in the wire from our power supply, positive power supply, through our major power wire here, all the way to this end, we're dropping 24 millivolts. Let's go on the other end, the closest end to the power supply, we're dropping 15. So just across this wire right here, we're dropping 9 millivolts of our voltage, okay? So let's just keep that in mind, that as we work our way closer to the power supply, our millivolt reading will go down. Now let's start over on this end this time. This is going to be our most secure connection, soldered and heat shrunk. We are dropping 22 millivolts, so looks nice, but that's a good number. 22 millivolts, I'll take that. 27 millivolt drop across our heat shrinkable butt connector. Across our crimp connector with heat shrink, 28 millivolts. Across our taped and soldered connection, we are dropping 29 millivolts. Across our improperly done butt connector, we are dropping, oh, there's a little bit of a change, 31, 32 millivolts. Across our non-heat shrink butt connector, we're dropping 33 millivolts, 34 millivolts. Across our unsecured connection with no heat shrink over it, 34 millivolts. Across our wire nut, now this is that rusty wire nut, we're dropping 38, 39 millivolts across there. And then last but not least, across our taped up, twisted together, there we go, there's an issue. Across our twisted and taped connection, we're dropping 113, 114 millivolts. So in this full circuit of our lighting array here, this is definitely our problem. We're definitely dropping significantly more, almost triple the amount of voltage drop across our twisted wire. So that would be the voltage drop test across all of these. Now, again, guys, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect all these, trim the ends, seal them, and then zip tie them underneath my truck for the winter, and we'll redo this again in the spring. So until then, guys, we'll see you next time, and we'll see you out for part 3 come the spring, I don't know, April tomorrow-ish, we'll look at part 3 for this. So make sure to check back for that. But until then, make sure to check out all our other videos. So thanks for watching. Happy wrenching, everyone. Thank you.